Okay, let's unpack this. We've received quite a stack of source material here,
Yeah, quite a bit.
all focused on recent statements, news reports, surrounding a prominent public figure.
Right.
So our mission in this deep dive, really, is to jump into these sources. We've got social media posts attributed to the figure, articles from places like Reuters, the New York Times, just as they're presented in our material,
Mm-hmm.
and pull out the key points, maybe potential insights they seem to offer.
Exactly. We're looking at what these specific sources highlight.
Yeah, we're going to explore quite a range. Claims on foreign policy, statements about trade, tariffs,
Discussions around global currency dynamics, too.
observations on talent flow, immigration, specific examples of domestic political commentary.
And reports detailing alleged financial practices, business strategies, even how the media itself is reported as covering these things.
Right. And look, some of this content, well, it's pretty politically charged within the sources themselves. So it's really important we stick to our role here. We're just impartially reporting on what the material contains.
Just the facts as presented in the sources.
Exactly. Helping you understand the ideas presented in those sources,
Yeah.
Without us taking sides or endorsing any specific viewpoint you might find there.
Absolutely. It's a diverse collection, and our goal is really just to guide you through the specifics of what this source material presents on all these different fronts.
Think of it as seeing the landscape, but like through the eyes of these particular sources we have in front of us.
Precisely.
Okay, so ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
All right. So diving straight into what the sources highlight first, we see a social media post mentioned. It's attributed to the figure talking about Vladimir Putin and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
The post is quoted as saying, "What Vladimir Putin doesn't realize is that if it weren't for me, lots of really bad things would have already happened to Russia. And I mean really bad." He's playing with fire.
Okay. And what's really fascinating here is how the source material itself reacts to that specific statement.
How so?
It frames the post as, quote, a disturbing admission.
Disturbing admission.
Yeah, suggesting it implies the figure was, actively aiding Vladimir Putin.
Wow. Okay.
And our source connects this directly to the conflict in Ukraine. It even goes so far as to state, based on this post, that the figure is responsible for killing thousands of soldiers and innocent Ukrainians.
So that's the source material's interpretation.
Yeah.
A very strong one.
Very strong. It's the source offering its specific take on that specific language from the post.
Okay, so you have this significant claim attributed to the figure, and then the source material jumps in with this intense reaction, this interpretation connecting it to major global events.
Mm-hmm.
How does the source material then sort of build on this? Or does it move to related areas?
Well, the sources seem to connect this international point to other statements attributed to the figure, specifically looking at trade dynamics now, focusing on Europe.
Hey, trade.
Another social media post is highlighted. This one's about tariffs on the European Union. The post quotes the figure stating he's extremely satisfied with the 50% tariff allotment on the European Union, and the reason given is them slow-walking negotiations.
Okay, slow walking.
Then he says he's been informed the EU has called for meeting dates and expresses hope they will finally open up the European nations for trade with the United States of America, adding that they will both be very happy and successful if they do.
Right. And the Post even compares this demand to his approach with China, according to the source.
Exactly. That comparison is noted in the source material.
Okay. And how does the source material react to this specific trade statement? Does it offer commentary again?
Oh, yeah. The source material directly challenges the premise presented in the post.
Challenges it how?
It reacts by basically asking questions like, we have open trade between Europe and the United States before you and your threats. We have trade deals. What the hell are you even talking about here?
Okay. So the source material's perspective is like, wait a minute, this doesn't reflect reality.
Precisely. It directly contradicts the figure's characterization of the existing trade relations with Europe, according to the source.
So you see these direct statements on foreign relations, on trade, playing out according to the sources, often via social media.
Mm-hmm.
But the material doesn't stop there, right? It seems to connect this to broader global economic shifts. And it cites a Reuters report.
Yes, exactly. The source material brings in a Reuters report, and this report suggests the euro could, potentially become a viable alternative to the dollar as a world currency.
Interesting.
It notes that if the EU manages to strengthen its financial and security architecture, it could earn, quote, immense benefits. The source even quotes the ECB president, Christine Lagarde, regarding this possibility.
And how does our source material interpret that Reuters report? What's the angle presented there?
Well, our source material presents a very specific interpretation. It frames this report as the EU recognizing an opportunity.
An opportunity
Based on perceived United States weakness, and demonstrating how unstable the U.S. is perceived to be from the EU's point of view, according to this interpretation.
Okay.
The source suggests the EU aims to project our strength as the new stable leader in a multipolar world order, and maybe even isolate the United States through efforts like strengthening the euro.
Wow. So they're linking the potential rise of the euro, as reported by Reuters, to this bigger strategic play based on how the U.S. is supposedly viewed globally.
That's the connection drawn in our source material, yes. Linking economics and geopolitics.
That's a pretty significant interpretation drawn from the Reuters report, as presented in our material anyway. It paints this picture of global economic powers making moves based on views of U.S. stability. And interestingly, our source material seems to tie this directly into another theme: talent flow. Immigration.
Exactly. Building right on that idea of global positioning, the source material observes that countries like the European Union, China, Canada, they also see an opportunity to get the brain drain away from the United States.
Brain drain.
And to get the smartest students into their countries. It claims smart students were once strongly attracted to the U.S.
Right.
And asserts that the figure is acting as a repellent now. A repellent to both smart money and smart students, according to the source.
A repellent. And does the source material point to anything specific, like policies?
It does. It points to specific actions it attributes to the Trump regime, stating it's ordering its staff to basically stop new student visa interviews.
Stop interviews. Why?
As it weighs expanding social media vetting. The source claims the alleged plan is to determine which types of students they want in and out based on their social media behavior.
And the source's interpretation of that.
It interprets this specific alleged action as further repelling foreign students from coming into the United States. So yeah, the material links this idea of global competition for talent directly to specific proposed immigration policy changes.
Okay, got it. So foreign policy, trade, global economics, talent flow, quite interconnected in how the source is presented. Switching gears a bit now, our source material also dives into domestic political commentary attributed to the figure.
Right. It highlights posts attacking California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Yeah.
It even quotes the figure using the term new scum.
Okay, strong language. Does the source offer context or counterpoint?
It does include commentary contrasting this. It claims that when face-to-face with Newsom, the figure is always a cowardly and pathetic individual and is too afraid to say it to Newsom's face. It describes a situation where the figure allegedly acted, kind of sheepishly when challenged directly. That's the source's commentary anyway.
Okay. And then the source material quotes a very detailed social media post attributed to the figure, specifically about California and Newsom.
Yes, a very specific one. The post claims the state continues to illegally allow men to play in women's sports.
That issue.
It mentions a specific instance, a transition male athlete allegedly winning an event, qualifying for state finals, stating this person was less than average as a male, but practically unbeatable as a female.
And the post calls
it not fair and totally demeaning to women and girls. That's the quote provided.
Okay. Now, what's crucial about this specific post, according to our source material, is there more to it?
Yeah, what's crucial, as quoted in our source, is that it includes a direct warning.
A warning.
A warning. Large-scale federal funding will be held back, maybe permanently, if the executive order on this subject matter is not adhered to.
Wow. Okay. So withholding federal funds.
That's the threat presented in the post. It also claims the governor himself said it's unfair and that the figure would speak to him about it.
So the source material presents this as a direct policy threat tied to a specific social issue.
Exactly. A very explicit link, according to the quoted post.
And our source material, does it offer its own counter-commentary on this domestic back and forth?
It does. It brings up another situation, reminding the listener about the figure suing the state of Maine on a separate matter and allegedly backing down. And it uses this, the source uses this, to call the figure weak and pathetic. It also highlights California's economic status.
How so?
Stating that if California were a country, it'd have the fourth largest GDP. Calls it a donor state, not a taker state like the red states.
Imply.
Suggesting, from the source's perspective, that the figure should maybe focus on red states instead of threatening California's funding.
Got it. So that's the source's perspective on that specific domestic conflict.
hmm This takes us into another pretty significant area covered by the sources, reports detailing alleged financial practices and business strategies.
Right. And how does the source material frame these?
Our source material strongly frames these issues around concepts like grift, bribery, and quid pro quo.
Okay, can you unpack what the sources mean by those terms, like grift or quid pro quo in this context?
Sure, when our sources use terms like grift, bribery, or quid pro quo, they're essentially framing certain actions as involving, let's say, potentially improper ways of gaining money or favors in exchange for influence or official acts. That's the framing presented in the material we have.
And to support this framing, the source material points to several New York Times headlines.
Yes, several NYT headlines are cited. The first one mentioned is Auction to Dine with Trump creates foreign influence opportunity.
Okay, and the source material's reaction to that headline.
It reacts specifically to the way it's framed. The source says it makes it seem like it's a good thing, and it questions what would be said if, any other president did something similar.
Interesting point from the source. What's the next headline cited?
Another one mentioned is why Vietnam ignored its own laws to fast-track a Trump family golf complex.
And the source material adds detail to that.
Oh, yeah, it describes this in detail. It states Vietnam overturned its own laws, removed these families that lived for generations to plow it all down so Trump could build resorts over the graves of these people. That's the description in the source.
Wow. And the source interprets this as?
The source material interprets this specific action as Vietnam's way to deal with Trump on tariffs.
A quid pro quo.
Suggests, a quid pro quo. Like, providing a hotel or preferential treatment might lead to lower tariffs for Vietnam. That's the source's interpretation.
And again, the source comments on the NYT coverage itself.
Yes, again, the source notes that the NYT coverage, as presented in our material, almost normalized the behavior from its perspective.
Okay. There's a third NYT headline mentioned.
Yes. Trump pardoned tax cheat after mother attended $1 million dinner.
And the source adds context from the reporting.
Our source material adds that the pardon application, as reported in the NYT piece apparently, cited his mother's support for the president, including raising millions of dollars, and also a connection to a plot involving Biden's family diary.
And the source's take on this?
Our source material presents this as an obvious quid pro quo. That's the term used. It claims that if any other former president did this, it would likely be grounds for impeachment or reported as potentially criminal. And it contrasts this, again, with how it perceives the NYT's portrayal as cited in the source.
Okay. Two more NYT headlines cited quickly.
Yeah, two more are brought up in the source material to sort of continue this theme of alleged financial gain and influence.
Which are?
As Trump's monetized presidency profits outstrip protests, and how Apple could plate Trump.
Plate Trump. What does the source make of that phrasing?
Our source material reacts quite strongly to that last one. It interprets the phrase plate Trump as like a strategy for an American corporation to plate the dictator.
Strong words.
Very. And it questions what it perceives as a lack of sort of apparent anger in the media reporting on this, based on the source's perspective of that NYT piece.
Okay. And finally, on the business front, our source material brings in another Reuters report, this time about Trump Media.
Yes, a Reuters report is cited stating that Trump Media plans to raise about $2.5 billion.
For what purpose?
With the intention, apparently, to invest in Bitcoin.
Invest in Bitcoin. Okay.
The report, as presented in the source, says the company is looking to diversify its revenue streams with a push into the financial sector.
And our source material offers an interpretation of this move.
It does. Given its claim that Trump Media was losing money on its social media platform and only made about $4 million in revenue,
right.
The source views this Bitcoin action as a plan to, quote, become like a treasury reserve for crypto and use Trump's influence to buy out Bitcoin and just harbor it in Trump Media.
Why would they do that, according to the source?
In order to have actual assets to justify pumping the stock up, basically. That's the interpretation offered.
And did the source mention how the market reacted, according to Reuters?
Yeah, our source material notes that, interestingly, according to that Reuters report, the Trump Media and Technology Group stock actually went down about 8% on that news.
Huh. Okay. So you have the specific business strategy involving crypto being reported and then interpreted by the source material.
Right. And placed alongside those alleged financial practices cited from the New York Times headlines.
Yeah. It seems like throughout these different points we've covered, from the alleged foreign influence stuff, the trade statements, to business strategies, domestic political fights, our source material consistently comes back to this idea
Hmm.
that these actions are viewed through the lens of grifting, bribery, quid pro quo, as you said.
That's the consistent framing in the sources we reviewed, yes. And it repeatedly offers commentary that the reporting on these matters, at least by the NYT, as cited in the source material itself, tends to, in its view, normalize or maybe understate the implications.
Right, according to the source's perspective on that reporting.
Exactly.
So, okay,
Yeah.
wow, what does this all mean then? We've taken a pretty deep dive into this collection of sources today.
We really have.
Explored a whole range of topics presented in the material claims about influence on foreign affairs, trade negotiations,
Perspectives offered on global economic shifts, talent mobility,
specific instances of domestic political sparring reported.
and those reports concerning alleged financial conduct and business decisions.
We've tried to pull out the specific details presented in these sources, things like the statement attributed to Donald Trump about Putin and Russia,
His posts about EU tariffs opening trade,
the Reuters report discussing the euro's potential as a world currency, the EU's strategic view as interpreted by the source,
those observations about brain drain and student visa policies highlighted in our material.
the specific back and forth reported with Gavin Newsom, including that detailed post about men and women's sports and the threat about federal funding.
And yeah, those New York Times headlines cited in the sources regarding alleged grift, pardons, reports on fast-track projects.
And that Reuters report about Trump media's plan to invest in Bitcoin and the stock reaction. We've really focused on presenting what the source material says and how it interprets these points.
Right. And if we try to connect this to the bigger picture, just based on what we've seen in these sources, these specific examples really touch on how domestic rhetoric, international relations, economic policies, and business ventures can all seem to intertwine.
According to the material we reviewed, anyway.
According to the material, yes. They show how different actions, statements, reports are being interpreted and presented within this particular set of sources.
So maybe this raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider, based purely on the material we've explored today.
Mhm.
How do the various domains discussed in these sources, from geopolitics and trade to domestic policy and personal business strategies, how do they seem to influence or reflect upon each other, based specifically on the details and reports we've just unpacked from these particular sources?
Yeah, it's worth thinking about how these seemingly separate areas might be connected, at least in the way the sources we looked at presented them. Something to keep mulling over.